All right, thank you. It's a shame no one came. It's great to see you all. Thank you very much for coming. As I said briefly earlier, I'm Sherry Ryer. I'm a professor in the U.S. Foreign Policy Program. And thank you for coming today. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Hossein Mousavian. Ambassador Mousavian comes to us today from Princeton University, where he's an associate research scholar at the Woodrow Wilson School's Program on Science and Global Security. He is also the author of a recent book, The Iranian Nuclear Crisis, a memoir, which was published by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace this summer. Recently.
Yeah, right.
Quite recently. Prior to that, Ambassador Mousavian's long and varied career, starting out with editor-in-chief of the Tehran Times. Actually, I should say starting out, since this is an academic audience, by getting a PhD in political science. Then moving to the Tehran Times. From 1990 to 1997, he was Iran's ambassador to Germany. From 1997 to 2005, he was head of the Foreign Relations Committee of Iran's National Security Council. If we could let her in, this is the ambassador's wife. Come. Please, thank you. It's important to make it. He was the spokesman for Iran on its nuclear negotiations with the European Union and the International Atomic Energy Agency from 2003 to 2005. And from 2005 to 2007, he was the foreign policy advisor to the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, and a variety of other activities. He is a frequent commentator on American media, on European media, CNN, various different NPR stations, writes frequently in a variety of different venues. And with that, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Mousavian.
It's certainly an honor and pleasure for me to be here today and address you in such a critical moment on Iran-US relations. But first, I would like to express my gratitude to American University School of International Service, Sharon, Eric, and other colleagues to invite me and organizing this event. Following the 1979 revolution in Iran, the U.S.-Iran strategic alliance that had lasted over a quarter century collapsed and transformed into a hostile relations to date. The duration and the level of hostilities with Iran is unique in the history of U.S. foreign policy. Since the revolution, Iran has presented a major policy dilemma for all U.S. presidents. Each president has applied a dual-track policy of pressure and diplomacy. The core policy they have pursued has been regime change in Tehran, while leaving a small window for rapprochement to succeed. Ironically, they have not only failed in regime change policy, but also in rapprochement. President Obama came to office on a platform that promised a revived and pragmatic foreign policy approach to achieve a breakthrough in U.S.-Iran relations through an engagement policy. In his 2009 inaugural speech, President Obama stated that the United States will extend a hand if you are willing to unclench your fist, indicating his administration's readiness for engagement with its foes, particularly Iran. As we have approached the last months of President Obama's first term, it's clear that his approachment with Tehran has failed, and both countries continue to consider each other as threat number one. As we have, in an election year, President Obama has credited his Iran policy for achieving the most comprehensive sanctions and pressures on Iran, proudly claiming that these efforts have reduced the Iranian economy to shambles. On his watch, covert war has dramatically increased and expanded. Simultaneously, Washington has managed to build an international coalition to implement multilateral and additional unilateral sanctions beyond the realm of those sanctions posed by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. The primary objective was to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue. Although today the Iranian currency has plummeted, cost of living has skyrocketed, and general outlook in socio-economic terms looks not promising, but the nuclear issue has remained unresolved. The number of Iranian centrifuges has increased to 10,000. The stockpile of enriched uranium to 7,000 kilograms, while Iran has also mastered the capacity of enrichment to 20% and producing the fuel rods. If Obama claims that he has done more than any other US president to harm Iran, I agree with him. However, what I do not understand is whether this was the objective of his engagement policy. I'm convinced President Obama was serious and sincere on his engagement policy, but it was reversed due to domestic pressures and beyond. However, regardless of whoever is elected as the next US president come November 7th, Romney or Obama, Iran will continue to be the major foreign policy dilemma for the foreseeable future. Therefore, finding a realistic solution is inevitable. There is no doubt that the United States is the sole superpower with the largest economy, military, intelligence network, and diplomatic reach to achieve the foreign policy outcome it perceives as necessary. In regard to Iran, the United States has used his power for over 3 decades without a breakthrough in its regime change policy or diplomacy for the sake of rapprochement. Therefore, the question is, why has the US, with all its might, failed on Iran? Ironically, during the same time Iran has become more independent and self-sufficient with extensive regional clout and influence, the country has continued to achieve milestones in the field of nuclear, biological, chemical, and missile technologies, despite of all sanctions and pressures. While Washington is convinced that its policies have weakened Iran domestically and regionally, it's obsessed with the Iranian influence in Afghanistan, Iraq, Levant, Middle East, Persian Gulf, Africa, and even Latin America. At the same time, Washington is puzzled with the popularity Iran enjoys in the Arab streets, while the US and Israel are seen in the Arab street as the main threat to regional peace and security. Following the US election, the next president will have to address the dilemma of dealing with Iran and decide whether to alter these past policies to achieve a breakthrough. Having served within the Iranian government for 30 years at different capacities, with a focus on Iran-West relations and my experience in the past 3 years at Princeton University, engaging academics, foreign policy experts, and general public, I would like to discuss the avenues to resolve the Iranian dilemma. Number 1, mutual understanding. The United States has to admit that they do not understand Iran correctly. The lack of official contacts for more than 33 years and relying on misinformation has resulted in major misperceptions, misunderstandings, and miscalculations on Iran. The same holds true with the Iranians, as their political players lack sufficient understanding of decision-making process in the United States. Right after his return to Tehran from New York, Iranian president, in his interview just this week, voiced Iran's vagueness in knowing who sets policy in Washington. He said, "We are not sure if Tel Aviv sets Washington's policy or the other way around." Therefore, the first step for politicians on both sides to take is to find the right way to better understanding. Number 2, cooperation or confrontation. Washington has to decide whether it wants ultimately confrontation or cooperation. The U.S. dual-track policy of the past 3 decades has included 99% pressures with the use of sanctions, sabotage, covert actions, military buildup, accusations, shaming, and demonization. Ultimately, this path could lead to a regional war, bringing about a protracted conflict with catastrophic consequences. Therefore, in my mind, the second task for both sides is to orchestrate a genuine and concerted efforts toward reducing the tension and build a new era of cooperation if they are convinced the 33 years of hostilities and confrontation is enough. The third is take the higher moral ground. To throw the failed policies of the past 33 years into the trash bin of history requires a president that has courage, solid belief, and a moral compass that will guide him or her toward making this monumental decision. In the past, diplomacy has overcome call for war. It was only through direct negotiations, mutual understanding, and a desire for better relations that led President Nixon to make his landmark visit to China and turn the page in U.S.-China relations. At that time, President Nixon faced stiff opposition within his own administration, both parties in Congress, and even his closest aides in the White House for engaging with China. Yet he resisted these pressures and stood on a higher moral ground to achieve international peace and stability. This is the quality of a U.S. leadership we need to put aside the failed policies and carve a new path for engagement with Iran. Therefore, a determined political leadership is the third factor for a major change in relations. Number 4, the spoilers. Washington and Tehran view one another as the primary adversary. For some other entities, the enemy number 1 is a good relation between Iran and the US. The spoilers are driven by their own national, regional, and international interests and view the continuation of hostilities between Washington and Tehran as a necessity in this equation, therefore ensuring that tensions are maintained and sustained. Therefore, there is a necessity for both Washington and Tehran to demonstrate wisdom and political maturity to avoid playing in the hands of the spoilers. Number 5, Israel. Needless to say, the United States considers its strategic relation with Israel as vital to its national interests and foreign policy objectives in the region. No doubt about it. Moreover, Israel has become the most vocal proponent of Iran and has weighed considerably on Washington's policy toward Iran. As some experts have conveyed to me, Iran politics in Washington is Israel politics. To make matters more volatile, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has made his mission to annihilate the Iranian nuclear program at all costs, including dragging the US into yet another war in the Middle East. Speaking in the Knesset, Shaul Mofaz, the leader of Israel's centrist Kadima party, said, "Prime Minister, tell me who is our biggest enemy, the US or Iran? Who do you want to replace, Ahmadinejad or Obama? How low are you prepared to drag relations with our closest ally?" However, bilateral relations between Washington and Tel Aviv is not my business. But I would like to voice my concern toward efforts to make war with Iran an eventuality, and the role of the US as necessity that could lead to a catastrophic end. What is important for Washington and Tel Aviv to recognize is that with increased hostilities between Washington and Tehran, Israel will bear the most cost. Inversely, Iran-US rapprochement will ease tensions with Tel Aviv. If these principles were well understood, then it would help change the dynamic. Number 6, the need for a perpetual enemy. A former US diplomat dealing with US foreign policy toward the Soviet Union during 1980s mentioned to me that once the Soviet Union collapsed, we lost our decades-old enemy. And the only viable substitute we found was Iran. Even if we consider this line of reasoning as valid in the late 1980s and 90s, it's no longer hold true in the 21st century. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the fights against Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and efforts to topple the Saddam Hussein regime in Baghdad, Iran and the US cooperated jointly, and only this cooperation led to removal of Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. This was a completely unprecedented cooperation between Tehran and Washington. It was this cooperation that expedited the collapse of Saddam and Taliban, but more importantly, it gave a glimpse into effectiveness of partnership between Washington and Tehran. Number 7, the real enemy. The public outpour and determination to bring a change to Middle East and North Africa has a long road traveled towards its noble goal. In the short term, the region has been thrown into flux, and with it has created a golden opportunity for extremism to exploit societal grievances and frustrations. Decades of Western support for dictators in the region enables the extremists to channel the popular anger toward dividing society along sectarian and ethnic lines. Therefore, the greatest threat to the hope of the people expressed through the Arab Spring or Islamic Awakening, whatever you want to call it, it's the rise of extremism. The rise of extremism and terrorism in Muslim and Arab streets led by Al-Qaeda and Salafism will dominate US and Iran foreign policy in the region for years to come. Therefore, to my mind, the 7th key principle to bring a change to relation is to recognize the need for a common responsibility for both countries to forge a close cooperation to fight extremism, terrorism, stabilizing the region, and safeguard the journey embarked by the region towards socio-economic and political reforms. To that end, US-Iran cooperation will be fundamental in promoting and supporting moderate elements in the region and combat terrorism to achieve a sustainable peace, stability, and development in the region. The last one, number 8, is a big deal. Since 2003, I have reiterated the Iranian nuclear standoff would remain unresolved as long as hostilities between Iran and the US continue to escalate. Therefore, the last but not least is the necessity for a direct Iran-US talks. In parallel with nuclear talks between the P5+1, 5 permanent member of United Nations Security Council plus Germany and Iran, there is a need for a direct talk between Washington and Tehran on a comprehensive agenda, including all bilateral, regional, and international issues, demonstrating the entire game plan, but implementing through a phased approach. I think for before election, the 8th principle is enough, and if Sharon invites me after election, we will discuss another 8 principles. I would prefer to go for the questions and not take much of your time for my speech. Thank you.
So I will both recognize questioners, and I also understand people may want to try and get out that door for a 5:30 class. So we will keep that in mind. With that in mind, there was one hand back at you, sir.
What's an example of some of the nations that are spoilers that you talked about?
I think you have already read a lot of WikiLeaks documents that our Arab neighbors pushed the U.S. attacking Iran. That's enough.
Thank you for coming to talk with us today. I think we agree that there's been some misunderstanding and some missed opportunities for rapprochement between the U.S. and Iran. I want to ask you about the window of time between when President Obama gave the speech in Cairo inviting a better relationship and the time when the U.S. increased sanctions on Iran. There was I think about a year's worth of time, maybe more, where the U.S. maybe foolishly, but was looking for an opportunity to see an improved relationship. And I wonder why Iran did not respond, or whether it did and we missed it.
I don't know whether you read a report in New York Times, I think it was about 2 months ago, revealing that in the first days in his office, Obama has issued a strategy to escalate covert war against Iran. And there was no deny from U.S. administration. It was a credible report. Anyhow, Obama came to office, if I'm not making mistake, January 2009. And the second problem was the time limit. They pushed Obama for engagement policy. I mean, Congress and different lobbies, they pushed him for 3, 4, 5 months period, while we had Iranian presidential election in June 2009. And the time limit was December 2009. And we had Iranian presidential election, very disputed election. The U.S. supported Green Movement, and actually just months after election, because of tensions created by the situation domestically in Iran, it was not possible for any kind of direct negotiations.
Yes, since 1979, there have been several actions taken by both Iran and Israel showing signs that they're willing to work with each other, maybe foster some sort of relationship. For example, Reagan selling arms to Iran during the Iran-Contra affair, the Conoco oil deal in the 90s, Iran's assistance to the Northern Alliance, as you talked about with regards to Afghanistan, and the Grand Bargain document in the early 2000s.
Iran and U.S., you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, in the U.S., yeah, the Grand Bargain document that came to the U.S.
Yeah.
With all these actions, why has nothing really come out of any of these events?
I believe the U.S. has never been able to distract itself from the core policy of regime change. That's why any administration I have not seen, I have been involved in Iran-West, Iran-U.S. relations since mid-1980s. And we have experienced all administrations, Democrats or Republicans. I really do not remember any administration was ready for a comprehensive dialogue and relation with Iran. They were all proposing piecemeal approaches. If you remember, I think it was 1988, 1989, President Bush, father, proposed goodwill for goodwill, asked Iran to facilitate, to support the release of American hostages and other Western hostages in Lebanon. It was just the end of the war, the beginning of Rafsanjani. Rafsanjani, I was a close ally of him. He really counted on this message. And he did his best. After some months, they had all Western hostages, they were freed. But the US side never showed reciprocated by goodwill. Rather, they increased the pressures and sanctions. It happened exactly during Khatami when he cooperated on war on terror with the U.S. against Al-Qaeda. But right after the victory of the U.S., President Bush named Iran as axis of everything.
Sir.
Yes, I'd like to know who are the domestic circles in the United States who would be against the rapprochement between Washington and Tehran? And second, also, would the United States be willing really to address the wide circle of issues instead of just focusing on the nuclear issue? And the last one is, what are the countries like in the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, now those United Arab Emirates, why they're so vocal against the Iranian nuclear program, and then they don't say much against the Israeli nuclear arsenal? They never mention much.
No, I think
much more odds towards Iranian.
I think if you just review the legislations by Congress right after beginning of Obama's administration, you would see continuously legislations for sanctioning and pressures on Iran. And you see public statements by AIPAC, pressures from Netanyahu, you see everywhere. I mean, this is not secret. You can find it very easy. You are right. One of the problems with the engagement policy was that President Obama took all other dimensions of cooperation between Iran and the U.S. as hostage to nuclear issue. And even on the nuclear issue, they were never ready to go for a comprehensive deal, even on nuclear. Arab countries, the regional countries, I really don't understand, because right after revolution, Iraq invaded Iran, just right after revolution. And all Arab countries, all neighbors, they supported Saddam Hussein. Unfortunately, the US also and the Europeans also. Soviet Union, they all supported the aggressor. Even aggressor Saddam Hussein used chemical weapon against Iranians. 60,000 to 100,000 Iranians, they were killed or injured by chemical weapon. The technology was provided from Western countries for Saddam Hussein to use chemical weapons. The relation between Iran and GCC was extremely tense. Right after Rafsanjani came to power in early 1990s, there was a meeting between Emir Abdullah, at that time he was Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and Rafsanjani, and they decided to for Rafsanjani to send a special envoy to Emir Abdullah to see whether the relation can be revived or not. That time I was ambassador in Bonn. I was called by President's office, and he sent me to negotiate with Emir Abdullah. I went to Jeddah, and for 3-4 nights, from 11 o'clock to 4-5 o'clock in the morning, in his private house, for 4 or 5 hours each night. We discussed. Ultimately, we reached to a very comprehensive agreement on security issues, economic issues, cultural issues, political issues. And the relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia and GCC was completely changed after this agreement from mid-1990s until Ahmadinejad was elected as president. Right before election, I think it was 2-3 months before election, at the time even we didn't know Ahmadinejad would be elected, we had a visit with the top nuclear negotiator. I was with him, Dr. Rouhani. We visited all GCC countries with the heads, and we discussed the nuclear issue to be sure if this is the real concern. And we told them these facilities, technology, know-how can be a regional, and we are ready to put on table with our neighbors to create all confidence building with your participation. And they said, no, this is not a concern, the issue of major concern for us. This is the right for Iran to use peaceful nuclear technology. And we were almost sure that we have done our job to present our capability, facilities to the neighbors, to make it a regional or multilateral arrangement to bring a confidence-building measures in the region if they are concerned about Iranian nuclear issue. But they said, no, we support your rights. But I was shocked even when I read the WikiLeaks in 2010, 2011, and the amount of pressures from our neighbors to US and Europe fighting even to attack Iran. I don't understand this behavior.
The woman here in blue, I see the hand.
The real enemies of extremism in those countries, and the U.S. and Iran should recognize the need of the common responsibility. What kind of role can Iran play to get together with the U.S. and fight against it?
Let's say today Syria. They can agree on a principle of free election with international supervision, United Nations supervision, rather than supporting weapons, the oppositions, either Iranians to support Assad or Turkey, Saudi Arabia, US, Europeans to support the oppositions, militant oppositions, to provide them weapons, which can lead to a civil war. Already we are in a kind of civil war in Syria. They can sit together, regional countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, Turkey, Europe, United States, and they agree on a realistic mechanism, not to bring a regime change by force, but to let the people to decide about their future, to put a time, first of all, to go for ceasefire, to bring stability, to stop civil war, sectarian war already on the way, and then to hold election under United Nations supervision, and then let the Syrians to decide.
Thank you for coming. How would a U.S.-Iranian rapprochement change Iran's relationship with Hezbollah? Do you think that Hezbollah would have to change its policies towards the state of Israel, or do you think that you would have to somewhat sever ties with Hezbollah?
If you go back to the history of the history related to establishment of Hezbollah, Hezbollah was established after Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. I mean, Israel invaded Lebanon, and then this group was founded by Iranian support, definitely, to defend the integrity of Lebanon. What can be the ultimate deal? If the US can convince not to invade Lebanon, respect the integrity of Lebanon, then Hezbollah can become a political party rather than a militant party.
You spoke of a lack of understanding between who makes policy both on the U.S. side and on the Iranian side. So, as a member of the Iranian government, former member, would you say that the supreme leader or the president at the time has the decision-making capability, and who should the U.S. engage? Should we directly engage the supreme leader, or should we engage the president?
This is exactly the questions they have in Tehran. We don't. They say we don't know who really decides: Congress, President, AIPAC. I mean, this is exactly the same question. But for me, it's clear because I have worked inside the system. Normally, the decisions goes to National Security Council first. Over there, President is member, Speaker of Parliament, the head of Judiciary, Foreign Minister, Defense Minister, Commander of Army. They are all there. 2 representatives from leader, 11 members, the highest ranking. They discuss the major political security issues and they decide. When they decide, they send it for final approval of the leader. If the leader agrees, then this is the policy. In my experience, I have seen less than 2% veto from the leader. 98% he has approved, although many of them he really didn't like it. He didn't like our nuclear policy. It was clear for us. He didn't like us to open all nuclear facilities, military sites to IAEA inspections. He didn't like us to implement additional protocol. You know, it gives a lot of access. He didn't like to suspend the enrichment because his mindset from the beginning was that the West is not after transparency. He's after depriving Iran from its rights. He said if they are after transparency, we would be ready to go for full cooperation. But when they are insisting on suspension, it means they want to go for cessation. That's why he didn't like it. And he was telling us, I disagree with you, but he didn't reject it. He let us to go to implement the policies approved in National Security Council.
He has 2 representatives on the council, so in that sense.
Yeah, but over there, even that time, Rouhani was his own representative. And he disagreed with Dr. Rouhani. Dr. Rouhani was the top nuclear negotiator, and he was initiating the policies I told you. And the leader didn't like it. It doesn't mean if he has representatives, the representatives exactly would say what he is saying.
There was, I read the news article, an analysis saying that if Israel would attack Iran's nuclear sites, Iran, knowing that Israel is a nuclear power, would just retaliate with a few missiles, but then claim a psychological victory like Hezbollah did in 2006, and that probably would help the Ahmadinejad government win next election, and that would be it. What do you think of that analysis?
If you ask me, a military strike would strengthen the position of radicals in Iran, I agree with you. I mean, my problem with pressures and sanctions and threatening Iran for war is 2. The first problem is the victim, they are Iranian people. A nation who likes the relation with the US is penalized by the US. The second is that such a pressures, let's say crippling sanctions or further if you go war, definitely would strengthen the position of radicals and radicalism in decision-making structure of Iran. Yes, I'm sure.
Would they stop at just psychological victory?
No, they would retaliate. they would go to the end. I have no doubt.
Hi, thank you for coming. So my first question is regarding Rafsanjani's call for kind of rapprochement on concessions after the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. You mentioned the futility of the dual track of pressure and diplomacy, but it seemed like U.S. force posture and military capability, military action in the region will actually open up an opportunity in 2003 that Rafsanjani provided. We didn't take him up on that, but so it seems to me that there might be still a role for that in the future. So that's the first question. The second question would be regarding the riots, the current riots for the exchange rate in the bazaars and that. It seems like if that's related to the sanctions, there's anger directed somewhat towards the government, and so how do you see sanctions play out in that the domestic pressure is turning towards the government, not towards the U.S. that imposed sanctions in the first place? So that just interested me. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
About Rafsanjani's position, I think there is no major dispute on the relation with the U.S. All political streaks in Iran, I think they have the same agreement that ultimately Iran and the U.S. would have to improve the relation. Even the leader has the same idea. The difference is about the technicality and the approaches. Iranian leader believes that the U.S. does not want a good relation, a healthy relation with Iran, and the U.S. is after regime change. It doesn't matter what you do, even if you support the release of hostages, even if you cooperate with them in Afghanistan, whatever you do, they would go back to their cold policy of regime change. Unfortunately, the history of war has left a very, very negative impact on the mindset of Iranian politicians. When a neighbor invaded Iran and the West fully supported the aggressor, they started to launch missiles. 1,800 missiles was launched by Iraq. And even they used chemical weapons. Still the West was supporting the aggressor. Therefore, this event left a conclusion within the mindset of a part of Iranians, including the leader, that it's clear evidence the U.S. was after regime change, not only regime change, disintegration of Iran, because, you know, Saddam claimed Khuzestan province is a part of Iraq. Even they were completely convinced the U.S. is after dividing Iran. Otherwise, about the content, a healthy relation with the U.S. based on mutual respect and non-interference, this is a matter of consensus between the leader, Rafsanjani, Khatami, even Ahmadinejad these days. I mean, he was in New York and he was calling for Iran-U.S. relations. Exactly, he had the same terminology. He said, based on mutual respect and non-interferences. Some of politicians, they are optimistic. Some, they are pessimistic. This is the problem. Unfortunately, the reaction and the policies of the U.S. has proved those politicians pessimistic, they are right. And those optimistic, they have failed in their overtures toward the U.S. up to now. About domestic problem, we have had for 30 years sanctions pressures. I mean, I really cannot imagine that the current situation would be worse than 1980 to 1988, when Iran was invaded and all international community was behind the aggressor. It was military strike, military invasion. And Iran was sanctioned by Europe, by US. Even during war, they could afford it. Where is Saddam now?
My question was, if bilateral negotiations were to occur, what sort of terms would Iran agree to, since technically they're not doing anything wrong by enriching to 20%, they're not doing anything illegal? What would motivate them to even come to a
No, the deal Iran has been proposing, this has been constant during Khatami and during Ahmadinejad. Iran has proposed the US, Europe, EU 3 or P5+1 that we are ready for 100% of transparency, 100% on transparency, implementing all international protocols, conventions, arrangements on nuclear and even weapons of mass destruction at the maximum level of transparency which internationally exists. Even we are ready to give access to the IAEA beyond the maximum level of international arrangements. In return, we want the US or Europe or P5+1 to respect the legitimate rights of Iran under NPT, like other member states of NPT. There are a lot of countries like Brazil, Japan, they are enriching. There is no legal problem with enrichment. This is the problem. Up to date, the US is not ready to recognize the rights of Iran for enrichment. And this is the main issue has blocked the negotiations.
So you speak a lot about the necessity for the U.S. and Iran to engage in diplomatic talks, but are diplomatic talks and political understandings enough to foster peace between the U.S. and Iran, or does a mindset change have to occur within the respective populations of the U.S. and Iran to foster peace? And if so, is it possible for the Iranian people to overcome their anti-U.S. sentiment after the harshness of the sanctions the U.S. has imposed?
No, I think if there is a political will in the U.S., they can change the public opinion within 24 hours. Mubarak is a good partner of the U.S. for 40 years. Even his dictator, even they know he was corrupted. But after revolution in Egypt, immediately it was changed in public opinion here. Within 2-3 days, Mubarak is a dirty man. If they decide, they know how to manage it.
No, but I mean the Iranian populace. Are they willing to forgive?
Iranian population, the people in Iran, the polls shows continuously that the nation, they have no hostility toward Americans, and they want normal relations.
You spoke about extremism, but what would you say to people who view the supreme leader, the president, and the Iranian regime dating back to 1979 as a form of extremism through the actions, their words, and you want to get rid of extremism? Wouldn't that be another form of extremism to get rid of?
So it doesn't mean, what I say, it doesn't mean that Iran has never had extremist policies. No, it doesn't mean. I mean, I believe what Ahmadinejad stated on Holocaust was wrong. Or news about wiping Israel off the map. It was not wise. I mean, I do not want to say that Iran has never had any extremist or extremism in his foreign policy. But if you refer to 1979, you should understand that the background, the historical background. In 1953, Iran had a democratically elected prime minister, very popular. The US and the UK, they made coup d'etat, a coup, and removed the democratically elected prime minister and installed a dictator and supported the dictator for a quarter century. And the revolution was reaction just to this. And everybody understands if there is a revolution, nothing is 100% under control. Attacking the US embassy, taking American diplomats as hostage. None of the Iranian high officials, they knew anything about this event. They were all informed after the event.
But prior to that hostage taking, I think it was a few months before, there was also a hostage situation at the U.S. Embassy when the Iranian regime, or the government, the transitional government, stepped in and calmed the situation down. The embassy
There was no other hostage problem.
There was.
No.
There absolutely was. I can pull it up in the article right now.
Hostage? Taking American diplomats hostage in Tehran before?
Iranian protesters stormed U.S. Embassy compound.
No, demonstrations maybe.
But the regime stepped in and restored order. The same leaders that were present during the hostage situation that went on.
No, the reason was this. I mean, the first reaction from the officials was the students should immediately evacuate the embassy. Immediately. They were all angry. But just within a day, the students, they were able to present Iranian officials about documents they found inside American embassy, interfering in internal affairs of the country, contacting the oppositions after revolution, not before revolution. And the officials, they were really scared whether the US is after another coup like 1953. This was the problem. But you should have in mind, I mean, my point is this. The 25 years US support for a dictator in Iran. If there is a revolution, uncalculated, unprecedented events, you should expect.
Hi. Earlier on, you brought up the idea that Iran's economy can take a lot of abuse over the last 30 years. You know, you were invaded and it continues to grow. But do you believe that it can honestly sustain itself, being that inflation is at 25% currently, GDP growth rate is estimated at only 2% for the next 4 years? Do you think it can sustain itself?
Iran has experienced for many years 60% inflation.
Okay, just keep it conservative, that's a place. But do you think it can last for a long time? Or
For a long time, no. I don't believe this can last. But if you are talking about 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, I think they can manage.
Yeah.
So you mentioned extremism in other Middle Eastern and North African countries and how Western support for extremism enables that. But what about in countries like in Africa and South America, not experiencing specifically because they have better relations with Iran and the US and West Africa?
In Africa,
In Africa and say South America, just countries that aren't very much on the list.
like Egypt, I mean,
Sub-Saharan Africa.
Libya,
Sub-Saharan.
I don't know any other country. But I'm talking about these two major countries, which we have: Tunisia, Yemen, Libya, Egypt, Algeria, Morocco. These are the main countries struggling with Arab Spring.
But not in the Gulf system, just relations with Iran.
Relation with Iran, I think they all have a medium level of relations. Not very hostile, not very good.
But is it better than
No, it's the same. I don't believe any of them, they have very strategic, now after Arab Springs, they have a strategic relation with the US like Mubarak.
Yes. You suggest that Iran's nuclear program is strictly peaceful. Why then does Iran feel the need to build these secret facilities only and to release news to the world that we have this new secret facility to scare the
No,
world?
it was not secret. I mean, frankly speaking, you hear 50% of the story, you don't hear the other side of the coin. When you say the secret facility, you mean Fardo.
I mean, back in 2002 or 2002, 2003 at the time.
No, if you are talking about Natanz.
I mean, all of them. They're consistent.
No, look, by the rules and regulations of Atomic Energy Organization, IAEA, we have NPT, and then we have a safeguard agreement signed between the IAEA and member states. The member states are committed to give access to the IAEA in the framework of safeguard. Until December 2003, Iran was member of safeguard like many other countries. Iran was not member of additional protocol. In the framework of safeguard, when you build enrichment facility, you don't need to inform the agency, the IAEA. When you assemble or build the spare parts and even assemble the centrifuges, you don't need to inform the IAEA. You are obliged only to inform the IAEA 180 days before the introduction of gas to centrifuges. It means you can build everything just 180 days before you can have 60,000 centrifuges, and legally you are not obliged to inform the IAEA. This is what Iran did until 2003. Iran constructed the Natanz. For construction, Iran was not supposed to inform the IAEA. Iran started to build centrifuges covertly, but legally was not supposed to inform the IAEA. When Iran was going to introduce the gas to centrifuges, Iran informed the IAEA. But the world was shocked how Iran has been able to master enrichment. This was the shock came to international community after 20 years of sanctions and pressures. They have been able to master, they were between 10 countries in the world to master enrichment and to have enrichment technology. This was a shocking point to international community. If you are a member of NPT, from the beginning you need to inform the IAEA. When you have the architect, the plan, construction, everything. In news, they claim this was secret. Yes, it was secret, but it was not illegal. This was the point.
Yeah. Yes, you. Sorry.
I kind of want to go back to 1953 and the coup of Mossadegh. I think the main reason of that was because of oil. He wanted to nationalize oil, because England then basically said, anyone buys from Iran, we're going to sue you. And then America got in on that 53, he's taken out of office, and the Shah comes back. And the Shah, of course, gave America a whole bunch of money for that, which, of course, delegitimized his power in the country, and you didn't really see anything happening where his reign kind of fell down. And then that led to Khomeini, who his first words when he came back from exile was, we need to cut off the hand of the West, which is abusing us, just taking over us, which is understandable because they wanted to have control of their own national resources. I mean, mean, do you still think this applies today? Is that part of the reason why all of this tension is happening all the way back to like 1979 and oil?
Yes and no. Yes, because the leader, which is the ultimate decision maker on foreign policy by constitution, believes that the U.S. policy has not changed. They want a regime in Iran like Shah. They don't want democratically elected system government in Iran. They want Iran completely in their hand, like the Shah, a puppet. This is their mindset. That's why the U.S. should be able to show if they really want a democracy, democratically elected government, Iranian people to be independent, not to interfere in internal affairs of Iran. They should be able to show, to prove. But the conflict on Iranian nuclear issue is a kind of reminiscent of oil nationalization to Iranians. The time Iran was going to nationalize its oil, they took Iran to National Security Council. Just because Iran was going to nationalize the oil, the UN Security Council issued a resolution putting Iran in Chapter 7 as a threat to international peace and security because just this nation wanted to nationalize its oil. They have the same mindset today, even the nation, that because they want to nationalize their nuclear technology, this is the same policy today led by US like the policy in 1950s led by UK.
But isn't it also a big reason that they didn't want them to nationalize the oil is because that could offset the prices of especially rich Westerners who have a lot invested in the oil? Is it the same for nuclear weapon? Like if they nationalize nuclear power?
No, the nuclear is different because oil is extremely economically feasible, but nuclear is not. The nuclear technology came by the West to Iran. Actually, the US laid the foundation of a nuclear Iran. It was during the Shah who US proposed Iran to have 23 nuclear power plants. It was the US who built Tehran Research Reactor. The first nuclear facility of Iran was built by US. Europeans, they were competing for nuclear projects in Iran. French signed $1.2 billion on enrichment. Germany signed 8 billion Deutsche Mark on a power plant. It was Europe and the US decided to nuclearize Iran. Right after revolution, and exactly the time revolutionaries decided to shrink the nuclear and military projects of the Shah, they decided not to have enrichment. In 1976, Gerald Ford issued instruction for Iran to have complete fuel cycle, including enrichment and reprocessing. But right after revolution, Imam Khomeini decided not to have enrichment, not to have 23 power plants. They said this is imperialistic policy for Iran to have. But they have already paid for one nuclear power plant. 7.8 billion Deutsche Mark was paid in 1975 to Germany. 90% was completed, but Germany withdrew from the completion, the other 10%. And France also withdrew from enrichment agreement, which should provide the fuel for this power plant. For Iranians, paying about 10 billion Deutsche Mark for these two, they had to complete it. They had no other way. They couldn't throw simply the Bushehr power plant to Persian Gulf. It was completed 90%. I was involved in negotiations 1980s, 1990s. I was telling the Germans, if you complete this one, Iran is not going to go for second power plant. Iran doesn't want to have enrichment because it's very expensive. And economically it's more feasible to buy the fuel. But they were saying, we are not going to complete it. We are not going to give you fuel. If you were Iranian leader, what you could do, you would have to go for self-sufficiency, to establish an enrichment facility to produce fuel for the power plant. You had no other option.
I have 5 people on the list. Okay, so in the yellow shirt, this fellow in the suit, the guy in the polo, the guy in the suit, and then the guy with the baseball cap. So that's how I see it. So, Mr. Yellow Shirt.
Thank you for coming tonight. I know you said that regardless of the elections here in the U.S., that this is going to be a long-standing issue. But I would be interested to hear your take on what's more likely to lead to a rapprochement, a Romney election or an Obama re-election?
I really believe that it makes no difference because in the U.S. you need a national consensus to revive the relation with Iran.
But didn't you say that that could change in 24 hours?
No, if there is a national, a consensus between Republicans and Democrats, they can change it immediately. Within 24 hours, Iran can be completely democratic country, or can be a dictator. Here it's very easy to make it. But as long as there is no consensus between Congress, National Security Council, State Department, and as long as there is no consent from AIPAC or even Israel, I cannot imagine we would be able to reach to such a situation.
The United States is a superpower, right? And but when it went to overthrow Taliban, it compiled an international coalition, and that included somewhat Iran too, and you acknowledge that. But Iran seems to want to face off the U.S., other nuclear powers, the spoilers in the Arab world, and go it alone in the region. Is that realistic?
First of all, on Afghanistan, it is true the U.S. made international coalition. But believe it or not, the major role was played by the U.S. and Iran. They were Iran as regional power.
Yeah, well, that must support my point.
Yes, yes.
How come Iran is not very much interested in building strategic alliances within its own neighborhood to secure itself?
Just tell you one story. In early 1990s, when I was appointed as ambassador to United Germany, when I met Genscher, German foreign minister, he made exactly your point. I told him Iran is ready for a regional cooperation system with its neighbors. He said, is it your position? I said, no. If you can come to Iran and sit with the president and discuss. He came to Tehran. He discussed for an hour and a half with Rafsanjani a regional cooperation system like Europe between Iran and GCC and the neighbors. Rafsanjani gave him carte blanche, and he said we would go for it. The German foreign minister was really shocked, and he told me this can change the political equation in the region and hostilities between Iran and the US. The first thing I would do, I would go to Washington. This would be surprising news for Washington. 2-3 months later, I went to see him in his home privately. He said, I'm sorry, Ambassador. Washington said no. But we didn't limit the initiative just to one diplomatic channel. From 1990, for a decade, in every high-level meetings, we told GCC members, Saudi Arabia and other countries, that we are ready for a regional cooperation system to maintain the security, peace, stability in the region. at the same time, in parallel, to have a good cooperation with other countries, including the US and NATO. But they didn't accept it.
Sir, yes.
I want to understand how Iran expects to be treated equal under the NPT when it continues to support the anti-government and some oftentimes criminal organizations in other countries around the region, like in Azerbaijan and Iraq and Lebanon, and formerly in Palestine. And what are the foreign policy goals of supporting these groups, and how do we expect that to work out?
The foreign policy, everybody is supporting its allies for influence. Saudi Arabia is supporting Salafism, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, everywhere.
Saudi Arabia isn't attempting to start a nuclear enrichment program, and so.
No, the nuclear enrichment it was not Iran's initiative. It was the US initiative. Iran, after revolution, did not start enrichment. Iran was the victim of nuclear program of the US. You should understand this reality. The nuclear program came to Iran early 1960s by the US, not by clerics, not after revolution. In 1967, the first nuclear facility was built by Americans. It was America who proposed Iran to have 23 power plants by the year 2000.
But it's currently Iran's decision to continue.
No, hold on. If Shah were alive, Iran would have 23 power plants by 1990, definitely. Iran would have multi-enrichment and reprocessing facilities, because it was contract. He signed the contract with European American. And it was clear for the West that Shah is after nuclear bomb. If you read the CIA report in 1974, written to Gerald Ford, the US president, the report says exactly, if the Shah were alive, Iran would have nuclear weapon by mid-1980s. And Shah himself, in 1974, made official statement in an interview with Le Monde. He said, if India is supposed to have nuclear weapon, the other countries should have it. It was clear for the West that Iran would have nuclear weapon. But now, after revolution, instead of 23 power plants by the year 2000, it is 2012, Iran has just one nuclear power plant. Iran still doesn't have enrichment in the serial level. For one enrichment, to provide fuel for one power plant, you need to have 60,000 centrifuges. Iran has only 10,000. Iran doesn't have reprocessing, and Iran doesn't have nuclear bomb. Therefore, thanks to revolution and clerics. Otherwise, if we had Shah, we had nuclear bomb, 23 power plants, enrichment, everything.
Gentleman in the suit in the back.
I believe that Iran adheres to the rational action law. I truly do at the end of the day. When you cut through the rhetoric over wiping Israel off the map, when you cut through its nuclear ambitions in terms of being peaceful, I don't understand why we maintain the facade that Iran's nuclear program is peaceful. I think that within the confines of the rational actor model, it makes every bit of sense that Iran would want to proliferate nuclear in a nuclear fashion. Given the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons, I think we need to just go ahead and get over it because it's a reality. Saudi Arabia, a huge opponent of Iran for all intents and purposes, has nuclear weapons in terms of its financing of the Pakistani nuclear.
Saudi doesn't have nuclear weapons.
Well,
so Pakistan.
I think it's about as obvious as it could possibly be that Saudi Arabia funded the Pakistani nuclear program. It has funded the Islamic madrasas in the Afghan.
Could you ask your question? I'm sorry, I promised one other person a question after you.
My question is, where is Iran benefiting from it? Now, I understand that if it weaponizes, if it proliferates, if it gets the bomb, the U.S. will be forced to respect it in ways that the U.S. has not respected it in the past. I think that In many, many situations, it's surfaced time and time again.
Okay, let me come back to your question. I know what you want to say. First of all,
they admitted to using the diplomatic P5+1 talks and even the prior diplomatic talks to just defer the inevitable, to keep it going.
No, it is not. This is not really true. I have been a part of nuclear negotiation team. Hundreds of hours I have discussed with my European interlocutors, privately, officially. I was the head of Foreign Relations Committee of National Security Council, the spokesman of nuclear fire. You would read in my book, I have revealed the stories. Just some months before Ahmadinejad comes to office, we had a deadlock because we put on table telling Europeans we would accept every objective guarantees for non-diversion of Iranian nuclear programs you wish, just to respect the rights of Iran for peaceful nuclear program. Below 5% the enrichment, you know, when the enrichment is below 5%, there is no danger of proliferation. We told them we would keep it below 5%. We would keep the level and the capacity of enrichment. We would implement additional protocol. We would implement subsidiary arrangement code 3.1. Internationally, there is nothing beyond these two arrangements. Nothing. We would give access to IAEA beyond additional protocol. We would be ready to make it a regional, international consortium, joint venture to bring the other countries facilities. They were not able to respond to rights of Iran because the U.S. position was zero enrichment in Iran. Zero enrichment. The U.S. position was not nuclear bomb. If the U.S. position was nuclear bomb, the deal was made. Because we told them, I told them, I have mentioned in my book, nobody denied, because they knew the stories. Even I told them once a proposal, I gave them a proposal. I said we would export every milligram of production. First of all, I told them we would keep at a pilot level. Pilot level, you know, it is not industrial level, just a few hundred or below 3,000. Therefore, it was limited number. Second, I told them we would keep it below 5%. Third, I told them we would export even every milligram of production of this pilot plant. We would not keep 1 milligram. They said we cannot do anything because the US says Iran cannot have even 1 centrifuge. Therefore, your assumption is wrong, is really wrong. Because today, it is Iran who is proposing the P5+1, is ready to propose to produce the 20% enrichment. If the P5+1 is ready to provide fuel rod for Tehran research reactor. If everybody is afraid about 20%, Iran is offering, not now, from February 2010, it has been Iran proposing the P5+1 for Iran not to exceed 5%. But they didn't give Iran a fuel rod for Tehran research reactor. They pushed Iran to build fuel rod. For fuel rod, you have to enrich to 20%. But the second historical fact, I believe you would not deny that in mid-80s, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons and Iran did not reciprocate it. Is that right? It's recognized internationally. Nobody is disputing this. When Saddam started attacking Iran by chemical weapons, Iranian military went to the then supreme leader to get permission to reciprocate. That time he said that the use of weapons of mass destruction from Islamic point of view is a kind of genocide. It's haram, it's forbidden. I'm asking you, if a country during war is attacked by weapons of mass destruction, 100,000 people, either they have been killed or injured, and the country did not reciprocate, what it does mean to you?
Can I actually ask you to keep your answer for just a little bit, because I promised one final person to ask a question. Gentleman in the, better be a baseball team I like.
Thanks very much. Adeem Politi, second-year graduate student here. And dovetailing off of what you said, it sounds, or what he presented, it sounds like a lot at the root of the tension, of the conflict between the U.S. and Iran boils down to mistrust. And in the conflict between Israel and Iran, mistrust. So earlier you mentioned that you agreed that the statements that Ahmadinejad made regarding Israel and the Holocaust were wrong and were unfounded.
Yeah.
No, the other countries that you cited as having enrichment capabilities for that have not made those kinds of statements that could be interpreted as threats in an environment of mistrust.
No, but my point is this.
Very quick, okay, let me finish very quickly. What can or should both sides do to bring about, to start rebuilding trust and back off of the inflammatory rhetoric and reassure those parties that they are not under threat by Iran's nuclear program, or that Iran is not under threat by the United States and Israel's position regarding its development?
I presented to you 8 principles, but first they should stop rhetorics. Rhetorics. The US or Israelis, day and night, they say military strike, all options on the table. When they say all options on the table, they should expect a kind of reciprocation. Second, at least for the period of negotiation, for the period of in a genuine engagement, they should stop hostilities, ceasefire, for period of negotiations, not forever. The problem with the engagement policy was that while the US was proposing engagement, it was mobilizing all its potential unilaterally, internationally, to increase pressures, sanctions, covert actions against Iran, making impression to Iranians that they are not sincere. Then they should seek to put all issues on the table. When I said a comprehensive package, the last principle, because they both want to see the end state. The US want to see what is the end state about terrorism, the end state about peace process, the end state about Israel, the end state about weapons of mass destructions. Iranians, they want to see a lot of end states in their parts. When I say a comprehensive package, because both parties, they want to see the end state. But this cannot happen just a night. If they can agree on such a comprehensive package, the package should be implemented step by step to create confidence. For example, on the nuclear, Iran can say, I would start to implement additional protocols, which I said, this is the maximum level of transparency internationally exists. And the US would say, okay, if you implement it, I would stop, for example, sanctions on central bank. Then Iran would say, in the second step, I would address possible military dimension issues with the IAEA. I would sign a contract to open the country for the IAEA to go everywhere to verify the possible military dimensions, P and D. To address the possible military dimensions, Iran would have to give access beyond additional protocol. If Iran signs this agreement, the US would say, okay, now I stop, for example, sanctions on oil. Then they can go forward. Otherwise, just you know, they went to Baghdad, the negotiations. Exactly the time they were negotiating, I was in a live program with Christian Amanpour in CNN. I heard from my friends that the P5+1 is going to ask Iran to stop 20%, to close Fardo, to implement additional protocol, to give access beyond additional protocol, and we would give you a spare part of passenger civilian airplanes. I said in the CNN, this is a diamond for peanuts. And one of European friends said, when we came out from the meeting, nobody knew what we were discussing. We just watched you live with Christian Amanpour with a headline, diamond for peanuts. I said, I know you Europeans, I know what you are talking about. This is not going to happen. They want the maximum, and even they are not giving the minimum.
So on that note, let me thank you all for coming, especially those of you who had to wait to ask questions.